So the last thing I'd like to do is talk about ARC-IC. Each FSA farm can sign up for a different program by crop. So one of your FSA farms can do PLC for corn and ARC-CO for soybeans, and the other one can actually use ARC-IC for your corn and soybean base acres. So the last sign up we had was for the 2019 and 2020 crop years, and you kind of already knew, or actually did know, your 2019 yields because that was a year with lots of prevented plant and some. It was the sign up was during the period when you kind of had a good idea what your yields are going to be. So what you could do is you could use ARC-IC on certain farms and spread your losses around and get some pretty substantial payments in 2019 if you were unfortunate enough to have really low yields and or prevented plant. So nationally, about 6% of corn and soybean base acres signed up for ARC-IC. And so what I'd like to do then is kind of look back at this. We're not going to have that same benefit of knowing what your 2021 yields are like we did for 2019. So you won't know if you have lots, if you prevent plant or have low yields. That's just the way the program is going to work is this way now, where it's in the future completely yields and prices. So which farms though might find ARC-IC valuable? If you have an FSA farm with highly variable yields from year to year, most likely it's going to be a smaller one, fewer acres. Those tend to maybe have more variability. It's more likely for a small patch of land to have a low yield than it is for a larger piece. 150 acres is much more stable in yield than, say, 10 acres. The next one might be if your county or if your ARC-IC benchmark yield is much higher than the ARC-CO's county yield or your own PLC payment yield. We'll talk about it. That might happen. And then the last one is people who have vegetable acres. There's a lot of those in the state, in some parts of the state. If you have more than 15% of your base in vegetables, it might be worth looking at that ARC-IC as an option. So a little more detail here. You're only going to see these highly variable yields in smaller operation or smaller farms. So maybe you have a small FSA farm, but then you're spending a lot of time over just a few base acres doing extra paperwork and generating extra work for yourself in FSA. It might just be simpler to do it all in one big ARC-IC, or ARC-CO or PLC, depending on the crops. Or if you want, go with the ARC-IC. Take a look at it. The other possibility is if your yields are much higher on your ARC-IC than for the county ARC or your PLC payment yields. Maybe you're one of the few irrigated farms in a county. Maybe you just put an irrigation system in the last few years and your payment yields don't reflect this. And there's no ARC-CO irrigation option in your county. I'll show you a map in a second to show what counties those might be. The last group that might find it is those with lots of base acres, that a farm that has lots of acres planted into vegetables. If you do ARC-CO or PLC, there's a 15% non-payment acres. They only pay on 85% of those base acres. But if you do ARC-IC, you get an extra 20 percentage points, so 35% are non-payment acres. And so, for example, if you have 40 acres of base on a farm, you can plant up to 6 acres of processing vegetables without affecting your payments. Because if you have more than 6, you would start reducing your payment acres one for one. One extra vegetable acre, one less acre of payment for the payment acres for the ARC-CO or PLC. But if you do ARC-IC, you can increase that up to 14 in this example, or 35%. And so that's the three that might find this useful. But if you don't want to look at it, I have my recommendations there: PLC for corn and wheat, and ARC for soybeans and oats. These are the counties that have the irrigated option for ARC-CO. And so if you're in one of these white counties for both crops and you have some acres, you have a high payment yield or a high average yield for under ARC-IC, you might want to look at ARC-IC because you can get a much better protection than if you were using just the lower yields for your PLC payment yields or the county ARC.